We're going to talk now for the next while about Maria Callas, who would have been 80 today. And we have with us somebody whose voice would be very familiar to a lot of listeners. It's Pádraig O'Rourke, who does presentation here on RTE, and he's also a special interest in Maria Callas, and he's himself a singer. What do you sing, Pádraig?
Well, my singing career has been reasonably quiet of late, but I did have quite a lot of exposure some years ago as a baritone. But the interest in Callas came about because I was asked 5 years ago for what would have been her 75th birthday to do a documentary for Radio 1, and that's where the interest came from. The documentary was subsequently broadcast on her birthday, her 75th birthday, and it was rebroadcast in August this year, and there was quite a reaction to it, an amazing reaction to it, so much so that we're going to rebroadcast it again on Lyric FM on Christmas Day. But aside from all of that, I mean, for anybody who's interested in music or the vocal arts in particular, she is a seminal figure.
She died in 1977, and still
Yes.
people are still fascinated by her.
Well, I mean, they'll be fascinated for her as long as there are gramophone records around, because
26 years ago.
Yeah. Well, this sort of artistry, is really unique. It doesn't come along it might come along once in 200 years,
Was she a great singer? A lot of people say, well, she wasn't a fantastic singer, but she was a great actress.
I would have to say, these are personal opinions, but she wouldn't be a singer, I think, in the sense that the voice itself was full of flaws. But you forget all about that. I mean, I actually approached the Callas documentary saying to myself, God, I don't like this, I ended up being absolutely wowed by it. And there were one or two pieces that I came across during the course of making the documentary, which I hadn't heard before, which just simply blow you away. They're mind-boggling what she was able to do with her voice and her body.
We have several clips from your documentary, and the first of them is her singing as a 12-year-old in 1935.
Yeah, she wasn't allowed to sing using her own name. Her father forbade it. And so she took the name of Nina Foresti, and using that name she appeared in Major Bowes' Amateur Hour on the 7th of April 1935. And we're going to hear the clip now. I think it's rather interesting, because you'll find that the voice was already there. The voice we knew later was already there.
What's your ambition? Operatic, concert, radio?
Well, my ambitions were very high, but since my father's laboratories are closed.
Father was a chemist. Well, what are you doing now?
Oh, I'm employed in the toy department of a large department store.
And you want to sing something from Puccini, huh?
Yes, I would like to.
Yes, I thought so. They all do. All right, what do you want to sing?
Something from Madame Butterfly.
All right.
A bit abbreviated.
That's good. Go ahead.
Quella nave bianca entra nel porto,
God, it's extraordinary already. 12-year-old,
Yeah, it is amazing that voice was already there.
She was born in 1923, and then the year after this, or 2 years after she did that recording, she went with her family, who were from Greece. She went to Greece.
Well, it was a little more dramatic than that. It was a very unhappy marriage. Her father and mother had a very unhappy marriage, and the mother told the father one day that she was taking the two girls back to Greece. Jackie was the elder sister, and rumour has it that he thereupon fell on his knees and gave thanks to God. And off they went to Greece. She subsequently came back. She studied in Greece with a very well-known singer. She came back to try and start a career in America. Didn't work terribly well, and she made her real debut in Verona. singing with Tullio Serafin, who was the great conductor of the day and who really helped to set her career on the road, if you like.
Yeah, and she became. This would have been when in the 1940s.
In the 1940s, yeah.
But she didn't become really famous till the 1950s.
Well, yes. She was trying to get into La Scala, and there was great resistance to having her there.
Why is that?
They just didn't like her. They didn't like her singing, and there were a lot of politics as well, you know. But in 1951, she appeared in the Sicilian Vespers by Verdi, and that began what was known as the Callas era in La Scala. And then the following year, 1952, was the date of her Covent Garden debut in Norma, and in fact we have a clip of that performance, which I think is some of the most extraordinary sound you'll hear from a human being. Visceral, listen to it. Absolutely. The whole body is singing. It's an extraordinary sound. And I think one of the things that happened after that, she was very unhappy with her figure. She was quite stout. And she set about losing a lot of weight. I don't know whether it's a true story or not, but they say she swallowed a tapeworm. And she lost 80 pounds. But those who had heard the voice before and after said that the voice was never as good again. After the tapeworm. After the tapeworm. But I mean, this does happen. I mean, the body changes, the voice changes, you know, and but of course, I mean, from a visual and an artistic point of view, and from an acting point of view, she looked more the part now. And I mean, she simply became the greatest singing actress of the 20th century and possibly of all time, you know.
Then she went to New York and starred at the Met, and then was fired.
Yes. She made her debut in the Met in 1956 in Norma also, and in 1958 she had a row with Rudolph Bing, who was the intendant, if you like, the Met, the general manager. She wanted new productions. He wasn't having any of it, and there were toing and froings of telegrams and letters, and very nasty things were said, and eventually she was sacked. And some years later, he made reference to it in an interview. It was actually quite revealing what he said.
Well, it was just a question: does she run the Met or do I run the Met? And at that time, perhaps very wrongly, I felt that I was running the Met. I mean, obviously, Callas was treated. Kid glove is an understatement. Every wish she had, and they were usually reasonable. But occasionally she became just intolerable. So eventually the moment came when I had to say, sorry, contract cancelled. Was she that much more difficult than other artists? The answer is yes. And I think mainly because she was that much more intelligent. With most artists, you could argue, but eventually you could get them around, so to speak. Callas you couldn't get around. She knew exactly what she wanted, and she knew why she wanted it. And that made things very difficult.
Then she was involved, of course, in that relationship with Aristotle Onassis, and she seems to have been very unhappy, particularly towards the end of that relationship.
Well, she met him, I think, in '59 on a yacht, on his yacht. She went on a cruise with him, and her husband was there as well. But a relationship developed, and she spent 9 years in that relationship, in which she was fulfilled as a woman, but diminished as an artist. And by the time it was over, she was destroyed as both. You know.
Right. We have time just for two pieces. We'll play one of them at the end of the programme, but the first of the piece is going to be La Figlia del Reggimento
it's the daughter,
Donizetti.
The daughter of the regiment, yes.
Okay.
That was recorded before her voice got really wild. She went through a period where the voice got really out of control on top and became quite unpleasant to listen to, and caused her an awful lot of problems. Even caused her enormous problems in public as well, with people, screaming their derision from the gods.
All right, we got to leave it.
She was, of course, the diva of all divas, the unforgettable voice of the 20th century. She would have been 80 this week, and in our anniversary slot after 12, we will remember Maria Callas. Now to the Sunday show anniversary slot, and a voice absolutely unforgettable and unremarkable. there's no mistaking that voice. Maria Callas, diva, film star, femme fatale. If she had lived, she would have been 80 this week. In fact, she died the 16th of September 1977. A chance, we thought, on this morning's programme to look back at this extraordinary personality and voice. Veronica Dunn joins us, herself a very famous Irish voice, now a teacher of music, and the journalist Robert O'Byrne. Veronica Dunn, 1947, you were a student in Rome in the back seat, and this enormous 18-stone woman came on the stage, and what happened to you?
Well, she sang in Turandot, and it was in the Caracalla in Rome, and she was singing with what's his name, Mario del Monaco. And I, of course, as a student, I had the back seats because it was the cheapest. But this voice was unbelievable. I mean, she filled. She must have filled Rome itself. But it was incredible. It was so even from top to bottom. But not only that, she was a very big woman, and I'd say about 6 foot tall, but very fat. She must be around 16, 17, possibly 18 stone. I wouldn't say 18 stone. But she was able, you weren't aware of her being fat. But this voice was unbelievable. It was incredible.
What was it about the voice? The colours, the breasts?
Well, I mean, she just took command of the stage. And as you know, Turandot is very difficult. And she just rang it out with such energy. It was wonderful. So I followed her career from then on.
And you followed her around Italy?
I did. But it was unbelievable because along with being this dramatic soprano, and she also was a colourtula, and she could go up to top Fs. She sang the Queen of the Night. It was unbelievable.
Robert O'Byrne, she has become a great cultural icon. Why do you think that is? Some say almost because her life was like an opera itself.
Yes, I do think that's a fairly critical point to make, is that she did have that perfect combination for achieving international fame, which is great talent allied to personal tragedy, and the ability to produce drama both on and off stage. I was thinking she might be considered the Elvis Presley of opera, but alternatively she might be the Judy Garland of opera, really, because of the sort of personal misfortunes that seem to afflict her.
Sketch me out her life story, Robert.
Well, her name, by the way, was Maria Callas-Padraig. I could be out a syllable or 7 on that. And she was of Greek parentage, but she was actually born in New York. Her parents had emigrated to the States shortly before, literally months before she was born. But she spent the war years back in Athens, singing, first studying in the conservatoire there, and then singing at the opera there, in fairly meager circumstances. And then she went back to the States immediately after the war, but didn't succeed there at all, just wasn't found, and so she went back to Italy, and very quickly, as Veronica Dunn has mentioned, she was taken up there, and her voice was appreciated. I mean, Veronica could talk better than I, perhaps, about the specific qualities of her voice and the problems that has always caused for a lot of people. Because, for example, one of the great dramas in her professional career was a rivalry, whether real or created or imaginary, with another great singer who was her contemporary called Renata Tebaldi.
Tebaldi, yes.
And Tebaldi was Toscanini's favourite singer and had a very beautiful, very pure, very classic soprano voice. Callas's voice from the very beginning was difficult and not always controllable, and that meant as well, besides anything else, a performance was always thrilling because there was always that slight tightrope without a safety net quality to it that she could fall off, and that's one of the reasons why there was so much drama about her life. Allied to that, she seemed somehow always to attract problems. When you look through her life, there were invariably dramas somehow created by her, such as famously in 56 I should say, when she was back singing in Rome at a gala performance of Norma in front of the President of Italy, and she walked out after the first act claiming that she had an illness, that her throat was problematic, but unfortunately about a week later she was photographed at a costume ball in Venice with Elsa Maxwell, which caused a lot of problems. And the following year in Edinburgh she was supposed to be singing La Sonnambula, and she left before the last performance of that, claiming that she didn't know there was supposed to be a next performance. So invariably there always seemed to be problems associated with Callas.
Now, Veronica McGuinness was the first, he was her husband, he was important. What was the influence he had on her? Why do you think she married him? He was much, much older than her.
Well, Meneghini saw in this woman, I mean, he admired her tremendously. And I think also that, Robert, if you don't mind me correcting you there, her voice was absolutely superb. And it was even from top to bottom. But then she was advised by Serafin to go on a diet.
And she took a tapeworm.
Yes, took a tapeworm.
To
Yes.
reduce her weight.
Yes.
And lost
Well,
10 stone.
Yeah, no,
Nobody had ever interviewed the tapeworm, so I'm not
No.
sure you're totally certain of that.
no, but she did actually.
And tell me about the influence this man had on her.
Well, he was very wealthy, and he opened many doors for her. And naturally, coming as a foreigner in Italy, it's very difficult to get into Italy in the La Scala. I mean, the last person, well, there are many others afterward, but Marco Boccherno, we'd never talk about her. I mean, she was singing in La Scala as well. But it's very
the opera mafia, as you would
opera
call it.
mafia, and it's very, very difficult. If you marry an Italian, you're away in a hack. But
Now, he was much older there, and you believe the marriage was never consummated, for example.
I honestly believe it was never consummated. I really believe that. And he managed her and adored her. But also, she knew when she had to marry him, because she was going to sing in the Argentine, in Buenos Aires, and she knew that she had to. She married him in Genoa, and his family was against it. And she knew that she wouldn't get back into Italy if she didn't marry him.
And then, of course, Robert O'Byrne, the Aristotle Onassis arrives.
Yes. You know, it was fortuitous that she should have met Aristotle Onassis, because that happened in the summer of 1959, by which time she had fallen out very badly with the management, specifically with what the man called the Sovrintende of La Scala, Ghiranghelli, and he had effectively, if not officially, barred her from La Scala. So, in a sense, she was at slightly a loose end, and she was invited. She and her husband were invited on a cruise of the Mediterranean by Onassis, because by this stage she was certainly one of the most famous women in the world, and by far the most famous opera singer, and she had an enormous allure of glamour, therefore, and so Onassis invited her, she and her husband, on this cruise, and she began an affair with him on the boat, even though both of them were married at the time. And by the time the cruise ended, she was heavily involved with Onassis, and subsequently divorced her husband. He divorced his wife. There was always, I think, certainly on Callas's part, that she would marry Onassis, but of course, as we know, he never did, and in '68 instead he married Jackie Kennedy.
And Jackie
somebody
Kennedy
even more
arrived.
glamorous, exactly.
And this broke Callas's heart, Veronica.
It did, yes. But sorry, Robert.
No,
Go ahead.
No, but I'd like to get back to the fact that you were talking about her voice changing. And the reason her voice changed was because she lost her energy when she came back down to 9 stone. You see, she had this wonderful fat, which maintained this magnificent voice. And I mean, if you look at the repertoire that she did, it was unbelievable. One night singing coloratura, the next night singing heavy role like Gioconda and Macbeth. I mean, she mixed her repertoire, which no other soprano would ever have done.
Have risk doing.
Yes,
really.
yes.
And the last years, Robert,
Were
she
very
retreated to Paris. Give us
sad,
a picture of her in
yes.
those last years.
Well, what happened was, post Onassis's marriage to Jackie Kennedy, she very much retreated to Paris. She was enticed out of that in the early 70s by Giuseppe Di Stefano, the tenor with whom she'd sung so much in La Scala in the 50s. And they went together on a world tour, but unfortunately by that stage both of their voices were pretty much shattered. And it limped along until it ended in Japan in '74, very pathetically. And she then realized that her career effectively was over and retreated entirely to this apartment in Paris, very, very rarely emerging, and died there, as you pointed out, in September 1977. Very young, she was still in her early 50s. Basically, her heart gave out.
And looking back on all the great voices, where would you place her, Veronica Darr?
That's the greatest.
The greatest?
Yes. I mean, if you look at the repertoires, I've already spoken about, I shouldn't be repeat myself, but what she was able to do with her voice was unbelievable. But I still maintain that because she lost the weight, the most important thing for a singer is energy. She lost her energy, and that's the saddest thing, that she lost her voice.
But what about the emotion and the passion and the power in her performance? Was that coming out of her own private life too?
No, she was a woman who would go on stage. The average person would go on and move their arms or just, as you know, Robert.
Yeah.
But she would just stand there. I mean, even in Tosca, one look from her eye
Is extraordinary. There is a very famous recording of the second act of Tosca with Tito Gobbi, which is remarkable because it is the largest piece of film, extant film, showing Callas in action. And a key thing about her voice is that she acts with her voice.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the reasons why she has remained so popular. It isn't always a beautiful voice, but it's always a very dramatically thrilling voice.
Come on.
I personally find it very beautiful, but we have to understand that not everybody would agree with us.
Do you not think that she changes with her roles? that
completely,
the quality
because-
of the voice changes, which very few singers can do.
Which is the case if you listen to what we
Yeah.
heard of
To the
her
character
singing
of what she's
Babino
singing.
Cara from
Yeah,
Giannischiki and compare that with Tosca or with
Tosca,
Norma.
yeah,
Each person
yeah.
is identified as a separate character in her voice. And
Yes.
that's very, very unusual with a
Which we
singer.
don't get today, you know.
No.
We don't get it.
Veronica Dunn, Robert O'Byrne, thank you.